Hey, it's Drew, and this is part 2 of Live from PSFK. And in this episode, we're going to be talking to two very different people. First, we're talking to David Stewart, who is the founder of Ageist. And he really will be challenging you to be thinking about people over 50 in a completely different way. Clearly, as someone who is in this target that he is describing, I welcome this conversation. And then we move into a conversation with Devon Powers, who is a futurist and a trend tracker, and someone really with some interesting insights on things that we should be thinking about. Her crystal ball is pretty darn cool. So give it a listen. I hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
We're live from PSFK. I'm going to tell you a lot about that conference in a second, but my guest is David Stewart. David is a photographer and founder of Ageist, a media company whose purpose is to reinvent how life is lived, experienced, and understood by those over 40, including yours truly. So I'm excited about this. He is an expert on the new life phase that is emerging among the financially empowered yet underserved demographic. Over 50. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's just talk about this notion. What really is the issue? So marketers are looking at we over 50 and just missing the mark?
Absolutely.
So what are they missing?
Everything. So.
Oh, just that.
Just that. So what we have here is the most empowered, most sophisticated demographic out there. So you're looking at something like 40% of the consumption is happening with people over 50. And there's no marketing effort being made whatsoever outside of, say, pharma and, a few fear-based banking ads, but there's nothing.
A little financial services trying to sort of say, hey, don't forget about your retirement.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Okay, so they're not targeting us because they're sort of, we're not cool, hip, young, millennials. But so what's the big problem behind that? What's the essence of that?
Well, I think what you said, there are two things happening. One, there's a millennial obsession, which is profoundly misplaced. That people assume that you need to be digital, right? We understand that, but there's this linkage that says that to be digital, you must be millennial, which means that me being 59, I have no idea how to use a digital device. That's
kind of stupid, isn't it? Since we're right now recording this on an iPhone with a very sophisticated piece of equipment.
Absolutely. And I think there's a certain amount of herd mentality involved. Everybody else is doing this, therefore we too. Even though perhaps the customer that we're trying to reach does not have the capacity to buy the thing we're selling or the desire to buy the thing we're selling, we're going to try and market to them anyway.
So you've done a lot of research in this area. Talk a little bit about some of the surprising findings, at least not from your standpoint, but that would surprise marketers about the over 50 demo.
Well, I think what's happened here is really the line in the sand of aging has moved dramatically in the last, say, 20 or 30 years. And what's causing that is that people have a rational expectation of living a much longer, useful life. And that changes all of their behavior. So if you think you're 55 and you're going to be dead in 5 years, you're going to behave one way. If you think you're 55 and you're going to be alive another 40 years, that's a long time. So if you're a marketer, that's going to give you, say, a 40-year customer ramp. Why would you not want that customer?
Yeah, that's if we look at lifetime value of a customer, that's another, you're right, another 3 decades.
It's tremendous. And there's also this ridiculousness about brand loyalty. And we've done a lot of studies about this, and really the brand loyalty levels of people in our group are no different from millennials. It's exactly the same.
So we're as loyal or equally willing to try new products as folks younger than us?
Absolutely, 100%.
So are there any marketers out there that you've been talking to that are starting to evolve and get this?
It's changed rather dramatically in the last 3 years. When we started this, nobody wanted to talk to us. They just thought old people, right? Because all they see is the, pharma AARP stuff. And we're saying, no, it's not like that anymore. But now, I mean, I got 4 RFPs last week. It's just dramatically changed. For instance, when we first started doing our interviews and the profiles that we do, there would have to be a negotiation with the subjects about saying like, I got to tell people your age, and they're like, I don't know about that. That's not the case anymore. Now they're telling me I'm 55. Check out this thing I'm doing. I'm 75. Isn't this awesome? There's a level of pride associated with it that wasn't there 3 years ago.
That's interesting. So I have been involved in social media and content marketing for a long time before it was called social media and content marketing. And I'm often the oldest person at the conference. Yeah. And it's like, who brought dad?
Yeah. Well, that's okay. I think that this idea of intergenerational teams is actually incredibly powerful. I mean, if you look out in the world of nature, the most robust ecosystems are the ones that are diverse, and the most fragile ones are the ones that are not. So, the situation that you're describing is really great. Like at Ageist, we make it a point. They're not all people my age. We want people like of all decades to have that input and that robustness. I think it's really important.
Well, it's funny. I was talking to someone else last night at the PSFK event, and we were talking about how sometimes you have to be outside of an area to really understand it. And so just having someone younger look at it, and they might be able to see some aberrations that you and I sort of take for granted in our
Absolutely. I think it's really important, speaking as someone who's 59, to listen to young people. Like my favorite people are like young teenagers. Like they're profoundly ignorant people, which is okay. Right. But every 10th thing they say is just like, oh my God, what's that about? Tell me about that. I think they're fascinating.
Hey, it's true. I was at a conference the other day and somebody looked at my saw lapel pen and said, what's up with that? And I said, well, what's the one thing that marketing has always had to do? Forget digital, forget all this stuff. What is the one marketing imperative? And he looked at me and went, cut through. And I went, yes, ding, 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 ding. That's right. Cut through. That is what marketing must do. And it's not just cutting through the clutter, although that's really important, because if your marketing doesn't cut through the clutter, it's like the proverbial tree in the forest that falls and nobody hears it. But it's also cutting through the crap and the processes that inhibit innovation. We've been working a lot lately with some CMOs to help them cut through the crap and get at the essence of what is their big idea and how can they make a case to expand that idea across their business. That to me is cutting through. So I worked on Panasonic for years, and every time a new young creative team would come in, the first thing they would want to do is create an ad that burst through the TV. I mean, it was like the first one that was always shown. It was the newbie ad. It would just, no matter what. And there's a certain sort of joy in that moment, and then you go, oh God. So how do you sort through some of that? And again, I'm sort of off topic here because I want to get back to what do marketers need to do to communicate effectively? And what is some of the things that you've learned that would help them communicate to this young but mature demographic?
Oh, it's so easy. The bar is so low. First step, stop alienating and pissing them off.
And how are they alienating and pissing them off? What are they doing?
Infantilizing us. We don't like that.
Just saying that. And so explain that a little bit more.
Understand that we've been around for a while, so we have the ability to make decisions. We feel at the peak of our power. We feel as though we're highly discerning, and we're in control of our lives. That we are not some kind of medical liability walking around, which is how we're presented. And so there's this tremendous dissonance between how we feel and how we're behaving, and then how we're being presented out in the world. So just harmonize that and say like, oh, we see you guys. We get this. We understand what you've done, what you want to do, what your ambitions are, that you're not some semi-invisible, medical group off to the side here.
Right. And that's interesting. But it's a huge demo. I mean, that's a lot of people, and there's a lot of variation in the people. So if I'm a travel, like a cruise company, right? I mean, obviously I have an over 50 target. Right. And when I've talked to some of those folks, well, the interesting part is that if we show too old, we do alienate the younger group.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the first things. You don't have to show pictures of people our age. You just have to signal that you understand us. And this is key. And I think that if you do show people, of a certain, like over 50, just frame it so that they're aspirational. And aspiration goes up and down the age column. But if you show people that nobody wants to be that, and the problem that marketers make is they will do these vast quant surveys, and they'll survey like everybody between 50 and 65, and they'll say, well, this is who this person is. Well, no, not. What they've done is they've managed to average out the entire demo, and they get a nothing in the center. And we tell people, be specific, because you can be average if you're talking to a 20-year-old, because it's more or less a monoculture. When you move older, the demo splits. Age, income, geography, and most importantly, that value thing that we talked about earlier. How do they feel about their life going forward? Are they looking to achieve more? Are they pushing forward? Or are they pulling back? Like that's the key thing. And then once you get that, it's, speak to those values. And I think what you'll do is people will find that the value commonalities between the people that I'm talking about and the 30-year-olds and the 25-year-olds, it's exactly the same thing.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, and I will say what I think you're absolutely right on is that the variation of folks in, and I know you don't like use the term boomer. I happen to be peak birth year, 1957 was the peak baby boom era. And I have older brothers, and my oldest brother, 6 years older, is really, that's a half a generation. In some ways, we're very different in terms of, if you were targeting the two of us, you would really need a very different kind of a program.
Absolutely. So this is one of the things that we discovered early on, that this idea of doing quant with this can really get you into trouble, because you're gonna, you do income levels, zip code, and you can have two people living side by side, drive the same car, same level of education, but their idea of where they sit in the future is going to drive everything. So if somebody thinks they're going to have this like vivid forward-looking future, they're going to be curious, they're going to want experience, they're going to be this kind of a drive to like anti-fossilize. The other people are playing out this kind of long last weekend. Okay, right on, go do it. But it's like exactly the opposite. So they're going to be closing down. They're going to be looking to the past. I was great in high school, or, that kind of thing, which is awesome. I got no problem with that, but it's just entirely different. And the only way you're going to pick that up is you got to talk to them.
It's like Springsteen and Glory Days versus Buffett. And speaking of that, and speaking of Jimmy Buffett, so he's creating in sort of, right? God. And how does that work into your world?
It's antithetical to my world.
It really is, huh?
It's just like, let's get drunk and die. Okay.
All right. Well, all right. Any parting words of wisdom that, again, we have a nice group of marketers listening in, as they approach this target you've gotten to know so well?
It's entirely doable. And it's really it is the white space marketing opportunity of our time. And we were talking, trillions of dollars here that's being left on the table. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but it really comes down to, work. You need to work at it. And it's a muscle that people they just don't have. They don't think in terms of aspiration and style and all the things that they think about with a 20-year-old. They just black out with this group. It's so difficult. But once you change that thinking, and I've seen it, it's like the light bulb goes on. It's like, oh, right, we can do this. We can talk to these people. And once you do talk to them, you become their champion. And it's so easy to do.
It's funny. It's you ignore the people, but if you start to sort of not ignore them, they sort of go, wait, I'm so excited. Thank you for recognizing, you saw me.
That's 100%. The biggest complaint that we get, especially from women, is this idea of invisibility. They feel it on a personal level, like starting in their 40s, but they feel it like out in the media broadcast world, the marketing language, they're entirely invisible. And all you got to do is say, I see you. And the problem that happens is you'll get, younger creatives, people in their, late 20s, early 30s, working on marketing to people who are, 30 or 40 years older than them. And I tell people it's the same thing as if you had a product that you wanted to market to the African American audience and you get a bunch of like white people in a room to talk about it. Fail, right? Because what's happening is in both of those situations, you're going to take your own value system and you're going to overlay it with stuff you've heard from focus groups or stuff you've read, but you're not feeling it because you can't experience it. And that's so much of the problem.
So if I were to wrap up, it's get to know this target and then just acknowledge them. Say, I see you. We're going to wrap up this segment with David. It was really a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
So we are live from PSFK, and my next guest is Devon Powers, who is a consumer culture connoisseur. That's a mouthful. Devon is associate professor in the Department of Advertising in the Klein College of Media and Communications at Temple University. Her research focuses on consumer culture, cultural intermediation and circulation, popular music, and promotional culture. She is the author of Writing the Record, The Village Voice, and the Birth of Rock Criticism, and the editor of Blowing Up the Brand, Critical Perspectives on Promotion Culture. I think we're going to be talking about somewhat trends in the future, and that's what attracted to me in your bio. So Devon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and chat with you.
So when you are doing your research, because you're working on another book, right? And talk a little bit about what your perspective is and what you're sort of discovering.
Yeah, so I've been doing a book about trends and studying the history and also the current practice of trends and the trend forecasting industry. And the thing that I find the most interesting is that people outside of this industry don't know a lot about it, right? And the fact that they don't know a lot about it, I think says a lot about both the way that we think socially about the future, but also about this industry's kind of, I don't want to say it's a PR problem, but I think that there's a lot that this industry could do to kind of promote itself and make it more known just to people who are beyond it.
So when you're looking at this, it's interesting. You're both talking about trends, but you're studying people who are talking about trends. And we get into this very meta thing. We talked about this last night, and I get confused. So maybe there's a specific trend that you've seen in this trend spotting that is of interest to my audience.
Yeah. So, one of the trends that, I've seen is, they're talking about, for instance, like unmoney, right? So the rise of different cryptocurrencies, the rise of different local kinds of currencies, and how people are really using new ways of exchange, right? So that even interaction, even a conversation that you have with somebody could be a form of exchange. And if you think about blockchain and the potentialities of that technology, really we're getting down to very granular kinds of things that can end up being exchanges between one another, ways to kind of get value and give value.
So you use the term unmoney, and there's lots of, and I think about that because, ultimately marketers are in transactional business. They want to sell products and services. And so when there's a new currency, they have to sort of think about, are we going to use that? How do we engage that? What are the implications for that? So it is an important trend in this thing. And what are you sort of learning about it?
Well, I'm learning that people want to they want to give value. They want to exchange the things that they have, but they want to be compensated for those exchanges too. And so I think about this a lot. You can think about a social media interaction where you are, somebody who's really in love with the brand. You want to tweet that brand out. They share something, you share it with your followers. It sort of goes viral in that direction. But we haven't thought a lot about what the sort of pay is, or what the kind of compensation is for those people who are doing those micro interactions on behalf of the brand. So I just think that that's something that brands and marketers are going to have to think a lot more about in the future, because I think that the consumers are starting to clamor for that kind of stuff.
Right. There's a sort of one thing that consumers often miss is that when they get something for free, they're paying for it with their data. And so what this implication is if you're, when you're creating content, there ought to be a marketplace for that content. There ought to be a means of being rewarded other than, hey, I got 5 likes, which is a currency.
It is. It is a currency. And, there's also, legislators right now who are, thinking about how do we change the laws? How do we start to think about people being owners and stewards of their data? What's that going to look like? So I really think that for marketers who've now gotten a lot of really great belief and buy-in from their consumers, they're going to want to think in the future about how do you, what's this going to look like if the consumer actually wants some kind of exchange? And maybe that looks like a currency, from your brand that you build up. I mean, we talk about reward points and things, but you could think about that happening in the social media space as well.
Sometimes I think in this space, it's just acknowledgement. A lot of times it's like, so every time I get on an airplane, I always tweet to the airlines. And it's interesting to me which ones respond and which ones don't. And it's, to some extent, it's just, we exist, and the brand has an opportunity to sort of acknowledge that we're in this universe, and they are too, and they can show some appreciation.
Yeah, and that's a human connection, and that's a way that you can feel seen and you can feel appreciated. I think all of that is wonderful, and I think all of that will continue. But I think that it's going to get bigger than that too, and I think that the possibilities of of people really trying to think, okay, what can we give a consumer that's more than just a, hey, we see you, that's going to allow them to continue their relationship and strengthen their relationship with the brand.
In some ways, the way loyalty points work, right? You use this particular product or service and you travel more, you get loyalty. I mean, just today, by the way, I got a free coffee. It was number 10, and mine is a soy cappuccino, and they were delighted to give it. And of course, that meant they got 9 of my orders this week instead of somebody else. So there was a little bit of that. And I think that's what you're, to some extent, some kind of reward for continuing to support a brand.
Absolutely. And through the social media space as well. Like, why isn't a tweet a reward point? Why isn't a like or a share a reward point? Why isn't an interaction some kind of currency? So are we going to get to a space where brands have their own literal currency that they use to kind of exchange with their consumers? It's possible.
Right. And that brings another thing will there be some universal currencies that can operate that will help these folks manage it? Because if everybody has their own, it's a problem. I mean, there's a reason the euro was created. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's already, you start to see partnerships, for instance, with like Delta and Lyft, so that you take a ride to the airport, that buys you miles. And we, as consumers, it is a little bit confusing and cacophonous because we do have all of these different kind of accruals going on. But what we have that there are very few of are these social media platforms, right? So if we can think, how could those become sort of storing houses or banks, if you will, for some of this thing, these exchanges that are going on.
And it's interesting because like with YouTube, for example, when you hit a certain threshold in views, YouTube will come to you and say, oh, by the way, you're getting a lot of views. Maybe we should have a revenue exchange.
Yeah. And partnership programs, right? That's an absolutely a possibility or a frontier that could be, where, social media again could be used to really not just, extract or take value from its consumers, but really build value for consumers as well.
So you're sort of a trend anthropologist. You go around and you watch people sort of, and companies and things, in fact, trying to discover their own trends. Talk a little bit about how your process works and what a marketer could learn from that in terms of watching trends and seeing how they unfold.
Yeah, so a lot of trend watching and trend spotting is informational, and it's information management. So it's reading all the time, looking at social media, watching lots of videos, talking to lots of people. And one of the most interesting techniques that I think about is environmental scanning, which is really just this process of kind of nonstop ethnography, which means looking at environments, assessing them, looking at the people, nonstop talking to the people who are in those environments, and really trying to use that to bring to kind of a holistic understanding of what a group of people or what a community is about. And I think that when that kind of stuff, those kind of qualitative sort of small scale observations are paired with data, you get really, really tremendous insights that grow from that.
This isn't a machine just cranking out and trying to find aberrations. This is a combination of sort of a machine helping with data, but then there's a human sort of seeing something that suddenly, oh, look at that, there's a pattern.
Yeah, so machines are really, really good at telling you what's going on, but they're not good at telling you why, right? And that's the part that's going to be very difficult to automate. There are companies who are trying to automate it right now, don't get me wrong, but that human observation, that ability to kind of see patterns, to use curiosity and insight to make inferences and then use those to extrapolate in the future, that's completely human. And it's really interesting when companies are good at pairing that with data analysis, with social media listing, with predictive analytics. You see really fascinating, explosive things come out of that.
Really interesting conversation on trends. And Devon, as we wrap up this segment, tell me one thing that you're seeing out there that you think is pretty cool that marketers should be thinking about.
Yeah, so there are so many changes going on in terms of how people identify themselves and how they interact with other people. And so I think a really interesting change around those is going on with the family, right? So what does the family look like, right? We've had changes in terms of racial identity. We have change in terms of sexuality, right? Now we're getting a lot of changes in terms of composition, right? Not just people having maybe multiple partners, right? Or using those multiple partners to raise children, but maybe people thinking about animals as part of their family, thinking about robots or machines as part of their family, right? Thinking about social media communities as family, right? So I think that whole conception of family is really important for marketers to rethink going forward.
Yeah, it's not the days of, mom, dad, and 2 kids or 2.2 kids and the dog are pretty much behind us.
Yeah, but also just like, what happens if you have a child who's born with born gendered one way, and then by age 5 or 6 is starting to express a different kind of gender, right? Like, that's very radical stuff. We think that happens in puberty and early adulthood. It's happening in childhood, right? So if you're a toy manufacturer, what do you have to do to think about, like, how do I make toys so that they're gender neutral? Or maybe how do we market those things in different ways, right?
Lots to think about, lots of changes. And I think what my main takeaway is whatever your assumptions are, based on the way things were, it's probably time to rethink them or at least re-examine them. Just don't assume. Stay curious. Yeah,
absolutely. Stay open, stay curious, and just stay as flexible and nimble as you can.
Awesome. All right. Well, Devon, thank you so much for being on Renegade Thinkers Unite.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
You're listening to Renegade Thinkers Unite. Find us at renegadethinkersunite.com.
Okay, so that was David Stewart of Ageist and Devon Powers, who is a futurist and professor at Temple University. And I think that the main takeaway that I want you to think about for those 2 segments was, 1, get out of the office and go to conferences that have nothing to do with your industry. 2, make sure that whatever assumptions you're having about your target audience, that you just take them and throw those away and start again and ask more questions to make sure that you really understand the target that you're talking to in a way that they will feel good about. And I think that David made that loud and clear. And I also think that Devon touched on that. So, 1, stay curious. 2, don't make assumptions about your target just because you thought you knew them. They may be behaving a little bit differently, and they may be responding to stimuli that you didn't expect. So, all right. Lots of renegade thinking here. Thank you to the folks at PSFK for your support of this episode. And until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.